Hello, this is the third part in a series of videos on the Muskox intrusion. In the first video, we talked about kind of the regional setting of the Muskox intrusion and the value of high-grade polymetallic deposits. In the second video, we looked at the local geology of the Muskox intrusion and also the various styles of mineralization that we see in the intrusion. In this third video, we will look at some of the results from our 2024 exploration program and just touch on a few of the key target areas that we visited. So in 2024, in July of 2024, we spent about 7 days on the ground doing mapping and prospecting. And really the focus of the trip was to get new assay results from several historic high priority showings. And these were really what's called Pyrrhotite Lake, the Equinox Zone, and the Spears Lake targets. And also, we had yet to visit the property since we signed the option deal with Bathurst Metal in 2023. So this was our first chance to get onto the ground and see some of the better well-known historic showings on the property. And we really wanted to get an idea of, what's controlling mineralization. Is there different styles? And this will briefly touch on 3 of these zones, and we'll go through each one. Just for a little bit of context, all 3 of these areas are along the eastern margin of the Muskox main intrusion, and the mineralization associated with the marginal rocks or the adjacent Hornsfels footwall sediments. And distance-wise, between Pyrrhotite Lake and Spears Lake, Pyrrhotite Lake in the south and Spears Lake in the north is about 20 kilometers in distance. So the first target is the Pyrrhotite Lake target, and this was initially discovered by Inco in the 50s, and this is where they had drilled off a small non-compliant resource. At least that's how they had published it in the early 50s. We visited this area and we saw kind of 3 main styles of mineralization. We found massive nickel copper mineralization along the contact, and we talked about these samples before, where we would get massive pyrrhotite crystals surrounded by loops of massive chalcopyrite, and that was in subcrop, which was a pretty impressive outcrop to see. You can see some of the historical results from these outcrops, where you're getting up over 2% nickel and 2% copper in those samples. We also found sharp-walled, massive copper PGM veins. So these are massive chalcopyrite veins within the adjacent footwall rocks. And these are anywhere from a couple centimeters to maybe tens of centimeters thick. We found 2 locations of those that were about 200 meters apart. And that's where you start to see some of these 6 to 9% copper values, and you start to see elevated precious metals up to 30 and 40 grams per ton. And the last type of mineralization that we found that was a little bit unique was silver zinc veins, massive silver zinc veins that ran up to 3,000 grams per ton silver and 10% zinc. These are, again, as sharp-walled veins in the adjacent country rock. So these are spectacular sort of values. These are from surface, high grade, predominantly copper rich, but again with significant precious metals credits to go along. So the next area is what's called the Equinox target, and this is about 5 kilometers north of Pyrrhotite Lake. And again, we saw similar sorts of styles of mineralization where we'd see sharp-walled, massive sulfide copper PGE veins within the adjacent altered footwall metasediments. These veins were up to 10 or 20 centimeters thick. They were very enriched in precious metals, up to multiple ounces. And as someone who spent a lot of time in Sudbury, these look very similar to the Sudbury footwall type deposits. And then along the contact, we would find semi-massive to massive sulfide as well, very high grade, in this case up to almost 19% combined nickel copper. And in this exact sample is 9.5% nickel and 9.2% copper, and over 10 grams of precious metals. So those samples are, that style of mineralization is usually right at the contact or just into the footwall. Within this kind of equinox target zone is what's called the historic Equinox Trench, and this was discovered back by Inco in the 50s. And again, this is another massive sulfide vein, so a copper, chalcopyrite, bornite, sharp-walled massive sulfide vein that's in the footwall, up to 10 to 20 meters thick. It's highly oxidized, so there's not a lot of fresh material left, but we were able to sample it and got some spectacular values, up to 20% copper and up over 100 grams combined platinum, palladium, and gold. And in that case, we had almost 3 ounces of palladium. And also of interest is, we're talking 7.5 grams of gold from samples from these massive chalcopyrite veins. So, pretty spectacular. These are things that you see in the Sudbury footwall deposits and typically suggest that this material has fractionated away from a more nickel-rich source someplace else. And, that's the big prize at Muskox, is where is the other portions of this sort of sulfide mineralization. The last zone that we'll touch on is Spears Lake, and this is a further 15 kilometers to the north. And again, same style of mineralization, sharp-walled massive chalcopyrite veins. In this case, it's about 10 to 20 meters thick. They basically are parallel to the dip of the contact, and they are usually in the footwall, altered footwall metasediments. These are enriched in precious metals, although relative to the Equinox Trench, they're not quite as enriched. And then you also find semi-massive, more kind of nickel copper rich mineralization at the contact. So those are kind of 3 zones that we visited last year. Similar sorts of styles of mineralization, all high grade. So you have contact mineralization, and you also have footwall, copper PG rich footwall mineralization. And what I find is really exciting is that these 3 zones are over 20 kilometers. Distance between them, and that just hints at the potential that whatever's going on at one spot is happening throughout the intrusion, which makes basically the whole contact highly prospective for this style of mineralization. Thanks.